Welcome back to the podcast with me, Pete Tigers. Many thanks again for all of the messages regarding the podcast. They're greatly appreciated, and it sounds like I'm not the only person that has an interest in Asp on the Fly after the recent episode with Alex. Also, thanks Dave from Seattle for the message. Coastal cutthroats, I'm in. Okay, on to my guest for today. We're heading across the Atlantic to talk fishing, writing, guiding, and a whole lot more with Tim Schulz. He's also written a wonderful book about a trip he made to Montana called A Castaway in Montana that we'll also find out about. Tim, thanks so much for dropping by. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Pete. I really appreciate this.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm really looking forward to talking with you, having read the book as well. There's so many things that I'd love to ask you about that as well, having enjoyed it so much. But for listeners, can you tell us where you're based?
Yeah, I am in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And actually, sometimes I describe it, the particular place that I live is the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula. There's a little piece of land that juts out into Lake Superior at the north west end of what is called the Upper Peninsula. I don't know how many people are familiar with it. It's a relatively small piece of land. I think it's 42,000 square kilometers with about 300,000 people. Some people think there may be more deer living in the Upper Peninsula than people, and that might be true. And it's the northern part of the peninsula has a shore with Lake Superior. Much of the southern part of the peninsula is Lake Michigan. The eastern end, Lake Huron, and then there's a stretch with a border with the state of Wisconsin. And it has much federal land, much state land, rivers running both to Lake Michigan, Lake Superior. Gives us opportunities for the three main trout in this area, brook trout, rainbow trout, brown trout. We have Great Lakes salmon and steelhead. So it's quite a wilderness here.
That sounds like a wonderful mix, and I guess you're spoilt for choice. What does that mean, though, for you from a fishing perspective? Are you moving water or still water? And what would you describe as your home water?
My home water, that's a little difficult to answer because I fish so many places. There's so many opportunities. I have one river that is 2 miles from my home, and I fish that quite a bit. It's a small stream that's actually being managed right now for Great Lakes coaster brook trout. So they're trying to reintroduce those to the south shore of Lake Superior. There are other rivers in the area. There's a Otter River system, the Ontonagon River system. A little bit farther from me is the Escanaba River system, which John Volker wrote so much about in his wonderful books. So I have sometimes a crisis of abundance, trying to figure out where I'm going to fish.
Yeah, it's a nice problem to have. I'm deeply envious of that. But interestingly, you mentioned to me about the coastal brook trout, and also Michigan, I kind of think of, because you've got the place as well, about grayling. And you talked about the reintroduction there, and it seems as though over there that the conservation has teeth to it and things get done pretty quickly as well. Is there, or has there been opportunities or people have worked on bringing grayling back to the area as well?
Yes, they are. And matter of fact, they're and I have not visited it. There's a small lake in the Upper Peninsula, not too far from, maybe an hour drive from me, that evidently has grayling in it. And I know they're doing work I'm not familiar with the details, but they're doing work in the lower in the lower peninsula of Michigan, to try to reintroduce those fish. And I know they've had efforts to do it in the past, and it would be wonderful, but it's a complicated thing. Their homes, their old homes, are very different. There's a lot of new residents in those rivers for those fish to compete with.
Because I guess it's probably one of the few places, if the only one in the world, that actually has a town named after that fish.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's and they changed their name. It was originally was Crawford, Michigan, and it was the county seat for Crawford County. But the fish were so popular, so abundant, they changed the name, and now they're gone.
And it's lovely we've gone down to this rabbit hole already about this fish, because it ties in beautifully. We'll come on to the book a little bit later, but I know we shared a similar journey after that fish when we were down in the Midwest there. So we'll come on to that a little bit later. But I would love to get an idea about you as an angler, and how would you describe yourself as an angler, and how do you like to fish?
I was thinking about how long it's been since I've fished with anything other than a fly rod. So I've once I got the bug for fly fishing, I'm a fly angler. But within fly angling, my favorite fishing, without question, is fishing dry flies to rising trout. That is, I get excited just thinking about it. There's something magical about casting to a particular fish, and then having that fish teach you a lesson or two. You think you know what you're doing, and the fish shows you otherwise. But that's my favorite. And I will sit on a log or a rock and wait for a fish to rise rather than cast blindly. That's just my preference. It's my favorite fishing. It's not the only kind of fishing I'll do. If the fish aren't rising, you might have to do something else. But if I could only fish one way from here on out, that would be it.
What do you think it is about that, Tim, that appeals? I was having this conversation with my friend Andy Buckley earlier about it, and we were talking about perhaps it's the stalking aspect of it, having to get the cast right, having to get the drift right, getting the fly pattern right, the hatch right. Is it a combination of all those things for you as well that makes it so appealing?
I think that's exactly it. And with many, not all, but many other ways of fishing, you don't know sometimes if you did the right thing or you just were lucky. But when there is one rising fish, you have to do it right. And you can see when you do it wrong, and that feeling of getting all of those little details, the particular fly, the right size, the right color. Does it sink a little into the film, or is it riding high? And battling all of those currents. Did you get the right drift? Did you put the right mend in your line? There's so many things that have to come together. And now we don't want to kid ourselves. We've all done it, right? Sometimes you mess the cast up, the fly drags, and the fish takes it. But more times than not, you have to do it right, and that's beautiful. I love that, Pete.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. We also touched on streamers as well, and we had this discussion about. I was saying, well, I do throw them from time to time. I haven't done a great deal of it, but it's always fun. And he said back end he likes to do it because you can see you might potentially catch something, or all the things that you didn't catch when you were trying to throw a dry fly at them. Do you ever indulge in those too?
Oh yeah. There are times. There was a day in the spring this year that I don't know what it was, but there was. I wanted to see the fish be the the predators that they are. There's something wild about them. We think of them sometimes, we fool ourselves with the dry flies thinking, oh, these are just dainty little creatures, very polite. Maybe they're wearing a tie to dinner, that kind of thing. They're they're boxers. They're street fighters, and sometimes it's fun to connect with them at that level. And I took one of the local rivers early in the spring. I took just one streamer. It's the Madonna. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a rabbit fur body basically with a muddler style head, and I love those in yellow. And I just fished that in a stream, and I got a brook trout, a brown trout, and a rainbow trout, all on the same fly, and it was fun. Yeah. So every once in a while, and there is something about that it's still, you have to, a skilled streamer angler is going to catch more than an unskilled streamer angler. And the way I like to fish them is kind of that Kelly Gallup method, where you see the fly most of the time. And there's something pretty spectacular about seeing those fish come at them.
Yeah, and seeing the lights go out when a trout eats it as well is kind of exciting, which is part of perhaps why we like the dry fly thing as well, that the fish comes up and eats it, and we see that moment that it happens. And we moved on to, do you throw nymphs very often as well? Because we were talking, Andy and I, again, about sighted nymph fishing, no indicators, absolutely nothing, and just watching the fish. Do you get the opportunity to do something similar?
In Michigan, in terms of sighted fishing, not much. A lot of the rivers are, in my area especially, tannin stained. So I'll do it. I certainly will fish nymphs when you need to. But I went back to Montana this summer and fished a very clear stream that had grayling and cutthroat. And I wanted to catch the fish on dries, but when they were ignoring the dries, I would put a dropper with a nymph, and it's so clear you could see the nymph, you could see the fish. That's exciting. So now you're sight fishing to a fish, and one of the things I learned at that time, Pete, was because you could see the fish, I could see them take the nymph, and many times they would take the nymph, move, and that dry would not move. And I came to the realization, oh my goodness, when you can't see below the water, you must be missing so many fish. Because I hooked many of those fish just from sight. I would lift and have the fish, but the dry showed no indication that the fish had taken the fly.
That's a really interesting point. And I remember being on a chalk stream one time, and I saw fish come for that. I was standing on a bridge watching my friend fish upstream, and I think it was 6 times I saw fish take and nothing indicated there. And I guess it's where that dry dropper in faster water probably works a little bit better, doesn't it? Because they've got to bite it hard and they've got to bite it quickly. But when it's an even flow, it sometimes can make it, not even detectable from that point of view. My mind's already thinking that river that you mentioned that had the grayling brook trout. I think I've got it in my mind, but I could be wrong. I'm not going to ask you to name it, but I'm wondering if it's in the park. That's the only thing I will say. But I won't say any more than that. Let's move on to tackle as well. This is a slightly loaded question because I know the answer to it, but I'd love listeners to know as well. How do you like to fish rod-wise?
For 10, 15 years, I've been fishing almost exclusively bamboo rods, and just fell in love with them. It's interesting, my progression as a fly angler, and I think a lot of people do this. I progressed to faster and faster graphite rods. And when you're fishing those rods, you realize in the end, I think why I was progressing through them is I started to learn to shoot line as opposed to cast the line. And it has a purpose, but I had gone to, I think at the time it was a My most recent rod was a Sage Z-axis, which I think was, the descriptor for the rod was a cannon and all of those things. And then a friend asked me to cast one of his bamboo rods. And my first few casts, I couldn't do it. I didn't understand it. And he taught me, he said, slow down, let the rod do the work. And I knew something was different. That is a different way to cast a fly line. And since then, I'm not, my wife and my friends will look at my collection of bamboo rods and think that I'm a fanatic, but I'm nothing like many, many people that are just know so much more about the rods. They, I know very little about them in a sense. I know who made them, and but I love them, and I think that's the piece. It's I know who made them, and they were made with someone's hands, and in a very personal way. And many times I've had the pleasure of having a few rods made for me, and the exchanging, either phone calls or emails with someone who's making your rod, and they're telling you what state it's in, and then it shows up, and all the little freckles that are in the it's alive, very much alive.
Yeah, it kind of feels organic, doesn't it? And you're closer to nature using one. And like you say, the slowing down aspect of it. I think part of that may be maturity, but I know I was fishing bamboo in my late 20s, early 30s, because I just wanted to do something a little bit different. But like you say, that interaction, if you're very lucky enough to have a rod built with the builder, is wonderful, isn't it? I know my friend Luke, that I often say to him, how did it feel when you were planing it? How does it feel? Those sorts of, and you get a real sense of that rod. And the most important thing with these things, because it can be delivered and you think, wow, this is almost too nice to use, yet they want you to fish with them. That's the most important thing, isn't it? Don't, if you are lucky enough, don't wrap them away, fish the things. That's what the builder wants, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everyone after that's a great point. The question the builder will ask is, not what do you think of it? How does it look? They ask, how did it fish? And they want to know the fish that you catch with it.
Yeah. So which is your number one rod? Which is the one that you usually pick up and say, right, I'm going fishing? Or like you say, and I have a very small collection that sometimes you say, well, I might fish this one, I might fish that one. But do you have one that probably is the one that you fish most of the time?
Yeah. There is it depends on the river. On many rivers, my favorite rod to fish is my first bamboo rod, which is a sweetgrass 4-5 rod, and it works in so many situations, and it's I have so many memories with that rod. In a little bit bigger water, without question, my favorite rod, and this, I think, because you've read my stories about it, is a Winston rod that Jerry Custich made. And that rod has been broken twice and repaired. Jerry repaired it once, and Glenn Brackett repaired it once for me. And I remember when I asked Glenn if he could repair it, and he said yes. And I said, because if you can just put it back together, I will put it on my wall so I can look at it and have the memories. And he looked at me and said, no, you'll fish it. I'll fix it. You'll be able to fish it, and he has, and I continue to fish with that rod. It's been battered. It's been repaired. It's had broken bones and put back together, and talk about the personality in a rod. That one has it, and that's a 6-weight. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's soul, isn't it? That really is. If we break a graphite rod, and I'm fishing graphite rods alongside as well, and there's one I'm really enjoying fishing right now, but if the top or the tip popped on that, it would be a new section. And like you say, and I know you describe in the book as well about having it fixed and the process that you went through. all of those sorts of things. And they're almost sort of battle fishing scars, really, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I don't know how you want me to handle this. I will say that this year I fished graphite rod more than I mean, I had hardly fished graphite, and I don't know if you want me to say the manufacturer, but I will just say that I've fallen in love with a new graphite rod, and it casts. It's not the same as bamboo, but it has that same feel to it. But what made me think about that is, if I break the tip, they will send me a new tip. If I break the butt, they'll send me a new butt set. They won't repair the rod. It won't have scars on it from the battle. That's a good point that you made.
Nice. Which rod is it?
It's the new Helios from Orvis. The fine, the finesse, I guess, is what F stands for. That I bought the rods, so I didn't get them given to me. So this is all my words on this. I really love the way those rods cast. Yeah, they've got a little heart and soul to them.
Nice. I've not cast one of those yet. One of the interesting things was just dawned on me when we were having this conversation talking about the builders. And since I've been fishing graphite alongside, and I was fascinated to hear that it was an Orvis rod, because for me, I've been searching out niche and smaller rod companies to fish with those. So Gatti in Italy, Stickman in Spain, some of the others out there as well that are really, really interesting. I don't know if that is a function of having that relationship you feel that you would do with a bamboo rod builder, that you feel a little bit closer when it's a smaller niche company. Have you looked down that route yourself too?
One thing I'll say, my awareness of that rod, I visited the Orvis rod building shop about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and got to meet the main builders who happen to be engineers, and but also see the shop and see the people, and it felt like I was touring a small rod shop. That, where they build that particular rod. I think some of the other rods are built at a more production facility, but where the high-end Helios is built, it had the feel that I was visiting a small shop. So a little different, interesting.
And that's a really interesting point as well, because we always assume these are multinational, huge companies, but it's a family-run business, I think, still. And you mentioned Sweetgrass, and you mentioned Winston as well, and I've seen both of where they work out of, and they're not big facilities by any means, are they?
No, not at all. That's right.
And yeah, fascinating stuff. And I remember I was on a road trip with my daughter. I said, Twin Bridges, I know who's down there. And we went way out of our way just to see what it was like. We found a fly shop, and I think I fished the Jefferson for a few minutes as well, but saw those. And it's, I don't know if that's a function of our community or fly fishing as a whole, that it is, relatively speaking, still pretty small, really, isn't it? Comparable to many other pastimes and sports.
I think so. I think you're right. Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but it in my circles outside, of course, you build a friendship circle within fly fishing, and everybody fly fishes, and most of them are fanatical about it. But outside, there's a lot of my friends, they don't understand what I'm doing. Why are you making it so hard to fish? And then, of course, many people don't understand why you would catch a fish and put it back in the river after you've spent all of that time and money and effort to catch it. So yeah, it probably is a smaller group than sometimes we think it is. We think that everyone fly fishes.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to move on because you're the former Dean of Engineering at Michigan Tech. Does your work life dictate how you view fishing? And one of the things I'm really thinking about is from a fly tying perspective, or more importantly to me, the tidiness of your fly boxes. How does that look? How do your fly boxes look given what you do for a living?
Chaos. I am, I was fishing on the Madison River, and we were talking, and we saw a fly box floating down the river, and we captured this box, and I opened it, and it was all of the words were Italian, but it was I think it was the Euro nymph style nymphs, and they were just meticulously arranged, and there was a labels that told the names, and there were numbers that I couldn't figure out what all of it meant, but it was the most incredible box I've ever seen in terms of organizational skills. Mine, I have, Pete, lately I have, and I can't get out of this rut. I have all of the fly boxes, but the flies that I'm fishing with through the season are in those little pucks that you get at fly shops. I'll put, okay, here's some dries that I might use. And if I need a dropper, I'll put it in here, and I just throw that. And so there's like 15 of those in my pack. And then when I need a fly, I'm pulling them out, and I have no way of knowing which one has the flies I want. So I have to look sometimes through 15 of these pucks to find the fly. And so that's my organizational skills, not scientific, not engineering. It's a mess.
That makes me feel so much better, and I'm sure many other people. It's fascinating. It was a Euronymph box. I could imagine that just trundling very close to the bottom of the river because it was so heavy. But one of the things I've noticed when you said that was that serious Euronymphers, their fly boxes are pristine. I don't know why that is. It may be because there's so many different nuances between the flies, the weights of them, and everything else. But really interesting that you mentioned that as well. But yes, must have been a fascinating find. I'd have felt guilty about the state of my fly box, but that would have passed in a matter of seconds, I have to say. But I wanted to move on because you also guide as well. So do you enjoy being a fishing guide?
I do. I do it part-time. I might do more coming in the future. I'm getting close to retiring from the university position. There's two extremes that I enjoy. One is if you have an experienced angler that needs you to show them, they've got a day, maybe you're going to float them in a boat or raft, and they just have a day to fish, and they need you to connect them to the local fishing. And you learn from them. It's just fun to watch them. And at the other extreme are people who either have never fished or have fished a little bit. Maybe I like those but they don't know what to do, and everything seems mysterious to them. And you take them to the river and literally turn over a few rocks and show them what the nymphs look like, and set them up, and then see the look on their face when they catch a fish. That is, and sometimes as a guide, you put a lot of pressure on yourself. You feel like, oh my gosh, this person paid a lot of money. I don't know what their expectations are. And it's easy to say, well, your expectations should just be to have fun and enjoy the outdoors. But you know how they feel. The people are going to feel they want to catch a fish. They're fishing. And so sometimes the clients will teach me something in that I'm a little inside, a little nervous, are they having fun? And then you realize how much fun they're having. And that's great. So without question, you don't guide if you don't care about other people and their experience. And I think guides that don't put the client for, aren't focused on their client, they probably don't guide very long. The other thing I had a friend, a young man that when he was a young boy, I coached him in baseball, and as he grew up, he got in touch with me. He said he wanted to learn. He wanted to be a guide. He wanted to be a fly fishing guide. And one of the things I told him, I said, you have to go and catch a lot of fish. Uh, Obviously, you need to know how to catch fish. But the most important thing is you could never, ever, ever be standing next to a client and wish you were the one fishing. That you can't have that. You got to get that out of your system, and then you have to start getting joy from the client. And I do. I love when other people catch fish.
That's a beautiful sign of a skilled guide because, like you say, the nervousness of them wanting to enjoy themselves. And I think if you don't have that, then it does become a slightly different game because, like you say, somebody may have paid a lot of money to fish with you and it's their day off, it's their holiday, and you're anxious for them to have a good time, aren't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. 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 It can be, you can feel the pressure at times.
So you're guiding when it's a day. Does that mean that it will be walk and wading, or will it be a drift boat stroke raft that you take people on? How do you take them for a day?
I do both. Both. Probably most of the guiding I've done has been wading. We have a couple of rivers that are easy to wade, have fairly cooperative fish. Bigger rivers, so you can get people get them a little farther from the bushes and the trees, so they don't have to worry about catching their back cast on something. But also floating. There's many rivers here in the UP we can float, and you'd mentioned raft. I have a raft that I use for some of those, which is great because there are some rivers that you can get a canoe in, but we all know that fly fishing from a canoe can be a challenge, especially for someone without a lot of experience doing it. But you can't get a drift boat into some of these rivers. I mean, you've got to take your raft. There's one, I'll take my raft and just let it slide down a hill to the river. And then when we get it out, we have to put a tow strap on it and drag it back up. And you can't do that with a solid boat.
Which do you prefer?
It depends. I think when I'm guiding, or even just fishing with friends, when I'm not doing the fishing, I like to row. I like the feeling of, because it gives me something to do. If I'm guiding when we're waiting, a lot of my time is standing watching, and so there's the proactive involvement of rowing. That's nice. They're both. I guess I prefer I don't want to be Kurt, but I prefer the one that I'm doing that day.
Nice. Yeah. And of course, the lunches as well. Like the guides when I've fished in the US, I don't think I've ever had a bad lunch. That's a important thing to get right as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Although, some guides, so during COVID, lunches were off we ask all the clients, bring your own food. We don't want to, be handling food. And I know some guides have stayed with that after COVID. But I like to fill up a cooler and again, as you said, for many people, it's their day off. And the lunch is a part of the experience. And sometimes it can be, you bring out the grill and you cook. But as you know, anything you eat alongside a river tends to be 10 times better than it's going to be eating it somewhere else.
Yeah, especially once you've got a few fish in the net when you're guiding particularly.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to move on to your writing. And A Castaway in Montana is your second book after The Habits of Trout. For listeners, can you tell us a little about the latest one?
Sure. I was thinking about this question, and I hope people are familiar with the television show Seinfeld that was very popular for many years, and the big thing about that show is they would say it's a show about nothing, And it's about life. It's about how life goes. And in some ways, you have to be careful how you say it. A Castaway in Montana is a book about nothing. It's, there's not a main theme that happened other than here is a guy going to Montana for the first time in his life, and without a serious plan. And when I started that trip, no idea that I would write a book about it. This was simply a fishing trip. I loaded up my Suburban, took off for Montana, and I had a plan to fish some places. I had a few people that I was going to visit, so I had a few things on my schedule. But for 3 weeks, my plan was just go where the rivers called me. And but things started happening. Little adventures started to come together. And I remember very distinctly, I was in the Sportsman's Motel in Melrose, which is near the Big Hole River. And it's next to a little bar called the Hitching Post. And at the time, they've since taken it down, the Hitching Post had a poster with Jim Harrison on it, with a Jim Harrison quote. And he loved that place, and he would stay in the Sportsman's Motel. And I remember I took out a legal pad and I started writing notes. I was probably a little over 2 weeks into the trip, and I realized, there's a story here. These things are all coming together, and there's a thread that takes you from the beginning, and this might be a story that people can relate to. And so that's how it came to be, and it took about 2 to 3 years to write it after that.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because I was going to come to a little bit later. It felt to me as a reader that the book flowed easily, and that's obviously a testament to your writing skill. But if you'd have asked me, I'd have thought that book came to you relatively quickly from a writing perspective, putting that in perspective in itself. But that's the way it felt to me, that it flowed, but clearly a little bit longer on working and pulling all those stories together.
Yeah. Well, and it's my writing style is, I now the engineer starts coming out in me. I edit and think about it and look at that story, and then I start analyzing it maybe a little bit too much. Does is that chapter tell the story I want it to tell? And is there unnecessary parts in it? Is it going to distract? Or is there a piece of it that I want to hold back a little bit just to put a little fun in for the reader? So the story itself, I probably had most of it on that legal pad, but the craft of it took a while.
Well, it was beautifully put together, and I loved how you described the trip as a first date with Montana too.
Yeah, that is very much that way, and so that's how it felt.
And Tim takes us to so many rivers that you would have heard of, you may have experienced yourself. There was so many in there that resonated on many levels for us. But also, like you say, you described the book as everything and not much, but it's beautifully crafted, beautifully put together. And I felt it was part reflective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much. Very, very, there's a lot of, on one hand, people don't want to know your story. On the other hand, people want to know, I think I want to know sometimes when I'm reading, how does your story relate to my story? And if you can tell your story well, and it makes me think of mine, I'm happy. I want that. So as I wrote it, I as you know, I used the opportunity to tell a little bit of my story. How did I come to fishing, and what were my influences, both personal, through literature, what those things, and I've had several people get in touch with me what are the things you look for as a writer when someone talks about your work? One that you love is they say, I didn't want it to end. And I've had that feedback a bit, which just makes me excited thinking about it now. I wanted to read it again, but I love it when someone tells me that it reminds them of their story. And it's even better when they tell me that story. I mean, that's when you know that it worked.
Yeah, well, it certainly did that, and like I say, I knew so many of the places. It was, wow, this is somewhere I wanted to visit and visited. This is a place I wanted to visit, and you talk about the Madison, and you talk about Ennis as a town, which is pretty much a one street town, isn't it? Pretty much there. Yet it was probably one of the fly fishing capitals in the world, and it's an extraordinary place where you're just walking up and down the high street and there are just people in fishing gear wherever you look, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure there's others that can make their case for fly fishing capital, but Ennis definitely has its case to make.
I remember two experiences there. One was walking into the bar with my daughter, and I think people thought I was a gentleman with a very young girlfriend, and it was actually my daughter. And we went into but you could see everything stop and look at us as we walked in. But I also had the best eggs Benedict of my life on the other side of the street from the bar there, which I probably could have swum in. There was so much of it there, and it was the greatest one. And whenever we're out having breakfast with my daughter and we have eggs Benedict, I say, do you remember that one? It was pretty special. But there's fly shops dotted all the way along, isn't there? It's an extraordinary place, isn't it? And we don't really have, the nearest I guess we have is Stockbridge with the Test running through the top, and a couple of fly shops, and Mayfly time, particularly, you'll see cars with rods attached to the bonnet, but not quite in this way. It's an extraordinary epicenter for people to gather, and an amazing river in itself as well, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is. It's a without question. Yeah, I mean, the Missouri River was a crowded river, but the Madison is, there are a lot of people fishing that river, a lot of boats floating that river. But I address this issue. It's a fast river. It's what they call it, the 40 or the 50 mile riffle, and it's not the kind of river where I think that much attention to it. If it was a slower river and had well-known holes where people could just set up and pound them all day long, it might be different. But I think that it handles it a little better because it has so much flow, and the fish probably, there's so many places for fish to hang out in that river. But it's something, and Montana's an interesting state. Everything has a beauty to it, and the sagebrush kind of feel around the Madison is still a very, very beautiful place, and the mountains off to the side they'll always kind of take your breath away a bit.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place, beautiful. Did you take anything from the process of writing the book yourself? Did you learn anything about yourself as a result of writing this particular book?
Absolutely. I remember talking with my wife about this, and you put so much time into a book, and you put a lot of heart into the book. When I finished the book, it would have been devastating on some level to find that no one would ever see it but me. But that was a lot of it. The process of writing the book meant a lot to me. I took a lot of it brought memories. And there's something about I'm typing on a computer, but figuratively speaking, taking the blank page and creating something that didn't exist, that no one else in the world could write. And that's true of every book that anyone writes. They write something and it's unique to them. So yeah, well, it was a very emotional experience, and I don't want to I'm not implying that the last paragraph, the last sentence of the book are anything as profound, nothing like the last lines of A River Runs Through It, anything like that. But for me, when I typed the last word, I cried when it was over, because it just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm done. I'm going to have to edit some more, but this thing that has consumed me for so long is done. And now we're going to polish it up a little bit, but it was an intense emotional experience for me.
And how did that feel then when it went on sale? Did you suffer with nerves, wondering if people would enjoy it and feel that your heart and soul had gone into that? It's very clear on reading it that has happened. So I would suspect nobody really felt that. But is there still that nervousness? Are people going to get it? Are people going to feel, can I put them in my place where I was on the river?
Oh, yes. I have that every day still. It's it's still an emotional experience. You have to tell yourself if someone doesn't like the book, I hope that everyone will feel it's. But I guess there's at least two parts of every book project someone does. There's the story. What story? It's all about storytelling. What story are they telling? And then there's the craft part of it. How well do they tell that story? And people can have different tastes about the story. They could say, I don't really care about someone going to Montana and their connection to fishing. But I would hope everyone would respect the craft of the book. That part of it, I hope that comes apart. That there was a lot of thought and it put into the craft of it. It's still a. You're out there once your book goes out. It's and you certainly hope. And I've had some excellent, just sweet comments come back to me. People have written me emails or shared something on Facebook that makes me want to cry when I see that, when someone tells me how much they enjoyed the book. But of course every writer feels that way.
But it's connection. That means that you've made that connection, doesn't it? And it certainly worked for me. And the honest truth about this is that the moment I finished it, I said to Emma, I'm going to write to Tim now. And I wrote to you the moment I finished it, because it was so beautifully crafted and put together. And you can feel that your heart and soul has gone into that. And what I also got from it was a sense of you as a person as well. And, I know when you talk about the guy in the shop who gives you the information about where to fish and the flies, and then you tracked back to make sure you found him. That tells me so many things about you as a person as well, which is heartwarming to read about the wonderful signs of humanity and a good person.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, that, to maybe make a little sense of how you go from not thinking that you're on a trip to write a book, to, oh my goodness, there's a story here. That piece, what you're referring to, the interaction with the kid in the fly shop, and what happened there, and how that affected me. And I knew I had a quest now. I had to get back to him, and how that wrapped around and connected to other things. It's when I realized there's a story here now, and there's a relatable story that I think a lot of people probably have had experiences that would remind them of.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting this sort of thing that, you said you have a Suburban, and as far as I know, that's a big SUV.
Mhm.
And you drove that down there. You made that long drive down, and like you say, you had no real plan, but you slept in the back of it. And I've not slept in my car for quite some time, but I'm getting the urge to do it again, and particularly with my dog as well. I've got this picture in my mind that the two of us just hunker down and then hit the river and hit a spinner fall early in the morning. That's the in my mind. But how did that go? And was that an enjoyable? I know you stopped off to have a shower at a place or
Yeah,
two as well. But how was that? Was that a fun part of it?
it is. It's fun, and then I have to share and be honest. I'm a little bit of a wimp. That if you're out in the dark and are there going to be wild animals, or are there going to be crazy people? And but for the most part, it's wonderful. And what I loved about it is, and I the go where you want to go. I had no reason if I woke up in the morning and said, you know what, I want to go fish a different river tomorrow, and I wasn't planning it, I can just go do it. And you don't have to get a reservation in a motel, nothing. You're not already staying somewhere that you've paid for. I could just get up and go. And it did. I changed plans several times, and I loved that part of it. That was great. And there is something nice about sleeping in the vehicle. It's you just feel this total independence.
Yeah, I do like the sound of that. And the book, the concept of it, surely that lends itself to other trips as well, and perhaps possibly other books.
Yeah, uh, this is one of the things I loved about that book is that, as I said, I didn't set out to write it. It was an adventure, though. Now, having said that, I am thinking about others, and one of the trips I would like to take that, if it all comes together, could work is I want to fish my way around Lake Superior. I live on the shore of Lake Superior, essentially. And so I would like to fish all the way around. There are so many stories that I'm sure will come about. And I think everyone who writes a book that is in the fishing memoir category likes to say, well, it's not really about fishing. That should go without saying, because no one wants to read about the fish that you're catching. And maybe they would read an article, but not an entire book. And it's about the stories and the place. And for instance, this connection to Butte, Montana, which had nothing to do with fishing, that I wanted to tell that story. And as you know, Bob White drew fly illustrations for every chapter. And many of the chapters, and he asked me what fly to draw. And many of them it was pretty easy, because there was a scene in the chapter that involved a particular fly. And they used Robert's yellow drake here, whatever it was. But there's about 6 chapters that have no fishing. And so we had to think, what do we do? What do we do for a fly? And I'm pretty happy with them. I think in a sense, they're like Easter eggs for the reader, maybe to figure out, why is that fly on this chapter? And so those were some of the most fun chapters to write, the stories about place and about people. The chapter on Glenn Brackett was one of the most fun to write, and no rods get cast in that chapter at all.
Yeah, nice. You talked about at the start of this that you've been back to Montana. Did that feel different? Did it feel familiar? How was it? Did you view it slightly differently?
Yeah, I've been back twice. And the first time I went, so this trip in the book was 2019. I went back in 2022 and I visited many of the same places, but also went to some new places. And some of the, on that first trip, I did visit some places that are not in all the guidebooks. But, so people in Montana would invite me back someday. I don't write about those. Right? So I think it's totally okay. No one cares if you write about the Madison River, if you write about the Big Hole, if you write about the Beaverhead, if you write about the Missouri. You're not giving away anything there. And those are all wonderful rivers. And if that's your first trip to Montana, you need to see those rivers. But I got to see some other places, and that was fun. And revisit some. And then just this summer, I went back and took my wife, and we were gone for about 2 weeks, and I think I fished 4 times. That was more to show her the places and see more of the parks and that type of thing.
Nice. Yeah, it gets under your skin, that place, doesn't it? It really does.
It really does.
Yeah. Well, I think listeners have got a sense of you as a person, as a writer, as an angler, and we've talked about the book a little bit. I know we chatted about this earlier. Do you think you'd be able to read us a little section so listeners can get a sense of you and the book?
I would be happy to do that, Pete. Thank you. I'll read the introduction to a chapter called Grayling. And one of the things that happened on this trip, I wanted to catch a grayling. And I knew that they had, because, grayling are wonderful fish, but they have an important meaning to me as a person who lives in Michigan. And I knew that they had them, they were in the Big Hole River, and I hoped to catch a grayling. And my time on the Big Hole was coming to an end, and I had not caught a grayling yet. And so what this chapter is about is my quest for the grayling. And what I'll do is just give the introduction to that chapter, the setup, and a little bit maybe share with folks how I feel about the grayling. Would that work?
Perfect.
All right. Grayling. A few observers had the foresight to realize the bounty could not last forever. Jerry Dennis. Imagine a land of virgin pines and untamed rivers, where every new bend reveals a scene envisioned by an artist, not an entrepreneur. Below each river's surface, slate blue fish with olive green backs and oversized dorsal fins cruise about in the carefree way of their ancestors. The trees are twice as tall and 3 times as wide as a telephone pole, but they spread about like staggered pillars in a temple, allowing you to see for hundreds of feet in all directions. A web of limbs and branches frames a thatched roof above your head. A lattice of soft needles weaves a spongy carpet below your feet. Some type of bug lands on the water and promptly vanishes, leaving a fading halo as the only marker of its existence. The nearest town is Crawford, but the town's name will soon change to Grayling to honor the fish with the elaborate fin on its back. To the south, in cities named Detroit and Chicago, each decade sees twice as many people as the last. The demand for new homes and churches and schools and stores far exceeds the supply. These are boom towns for builders, provided they have the timber. Rugged men with handlebar mustaches, the sort who inspire the wardrobes of 20-something hipsters in another century, will fell the trees, then skid them, roll them, jam them, and drive them to the mills. And though the drives will scour the rivers and strip them of their shade, the grayling will win the battle and survive. But like Lee after Chancellorsville, they won't win the war. And unlike Lee at Appomattox, they won't be asked to surrender. Crowds will come from the cities built upon the bones of the pines. The town named for the fish will welcome these people, mostly for the money they spend. The visitors won't be great anglers, but it won't matter. Nothing will have prepared them for a battle like this. The grayling will eat anything that looks like a bug. The people will catch them and catch them and catch them until the day when they can't catch them anymore. What I've asked you to imagine is the story of Michigan's grayling. I often fish the Otter River where Walter Erickson caught the last of these fish in 1934. There's still more deer than people along this river and more otters than boats. But the white pine and grayling are gone, and we have failed to undo what we have done. We've tried, but like automobiles and reputations, fragile fish populations are much easier to maintain than to repair. Tomorrow is the last day I will fish the Big Hole River, and I still haven't caught a grayling. Without a guide, I've struggled with one of fly fishing's golden rules. Don't leave fish to find fish. I catch a brown trout, and though I know I should know better, I think the grayling will be upstream. When I get a brook trout upstream, I guess the grayling must be downstream. And so I jump from spot to spot when I should pick a section and fish it. I worry now. I've run out of jumps.
Great reading, Tim. That was a really great read. Thank you for that. And for everyone listening, I hope you've now got a sense as someone who's read the book that you're getting a sense of it as well. And yeah, I'm with you. And I know I messaged you before I'd finished the book saying you'd mentioned grayling, and I've been to the Big Hole because I wanted to catch grayling too from there, and took a big detour to be able to do it. And that's perfect. Great reading and a fabulous book. And those grayling are pretty cool at the Big Hole, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, can you let and remind listeners of the titles of both the books and where they can get hold of them?
Sure. So the book I had written just a few years before that trip, The Habits of Trout and Other Unsolved Mysteries. That's a self-published book. You can get that on Amazon, and you can also get signed copies from Bob White Studio. And likewise, A Castaway in Montana, you can get that pretty much anywhere. That's published with Lions Press. You can get that pretty much anywhere books are sold. And again, signed copies from Bob White Studio.
Fantastic. I think I'm going to get the copy of the first book shortly afterwards as well. How can people, we've spoken over an hour now, Tim, but I'd love people to be able to connect with you. How do people find you? What are your social media handles? Do you have a website, etc.?
Yeah, on Facebook, I'm Tim Schulz. I think on Instagram, Timothy or Schulz.TimothyJ. And then website is timschultzwriter.com.
Fantastic. Tim, it's been absolutely wonderful to speak with you. I know this could have been a loving about Montana if I hadn't allowed it, but it's been absolutely fantastic chatting with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me, Pete.
Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. I invited Tim along to this episode. No cash or anything has taken past hands. I just really, really enjoyed reading the book, and I thought I wanted to share it with you. It really is a wonderful read, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I'll stick my neck out and say, if you buy it, you're going to enjoy it. So I hope you do. I love to support creative people in whatever format that actually is. And Tim's a wonderful example of a fly fishing writer. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As ever, there's going to be plenty more coming very, very soon. But thank you so much for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.